It is pretty clear that the MLB schedule makers are trying not to compete with Thursday Night Football because if you look at the slate for today, it is scatterbrained is the one way I would say things because we got games starting at noon, games starting at 2, games starting at like 5 o'clock, and not a whole lot to choose from. So weirdly, the main slate tonight on FanDuel locks at 5 p.m. We also have an early only slate at 2 p.m. So let's make the best of what we got and make this a split slate podcast for today here on the Solo Shot, where we'll be breaking down both the early only and the main slates. As always, we'll do the main slate first, starting off with that to keep it fresher for those who are listening later on. That's at 5:05 p.m. So if you're listening after 5 o'clock, sorry, we'll see you tomorrow. Just 4 games there. We'll talk about that first, and then we'll talk about the early-only slate. That is 3 games locks at 2:10. We'll do the main slate first. If you want to check out where the early-only slate breakdown begins, go to the episode description. Check out the timestamp there. I'll put the timestamp in that description. Go there, hit that up, get those lineups in, then come back for the main slate. So again, starting off with the main slate at 5:05, early-only slate at 2 p.m., coming up later on. We'll break down the main slate here in just 1 second. But first, before getting into this week's sleepers, I want to let you know that, I read the wrong read there. Before breaking down the main slate, I want to let you know that FanDuel is giving you the opportunity to get in on the NFL action each week with the NFL Sunday Million. This week, the prize pool is a whopping $3 million, with first place taking home $1 million. All you got to do is head over to FanDuel.com, click the NFL Sunday Million contest, fill out your lineup, and go win some cash. Eligibility restrictions apply. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app for more details. Before we talk about the main slate as well, did want to do a scheduling reminder for today. We have our Thursday night football preview. That'll be with myself and Olivia Moody, Liv Moods. We're going to break down Thursday night football. We'll be talking betting, props. I'll be talking some single game DFS as well. That's at 4 p.m. on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. The MLB Q&A is at 4:30. So leading right into lock, basically, which means I'll have like 5 to 10, 15 minutes to fill out lineups, which should be fun. Either way, that's from 4:30 to 5 p.m. So if you want to talk MLB, swing by later on today, 4:30, but also come by at 4 p.m. for the breakdown of Thursday Night Football. We have our Week 2 NFL DFS preview podcast going up later today as well. It's at 10 a.m. on the FanDuel YouTube page and up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy podcast feed after that. So check it out. Make sure you subscribe to the FanDuel YouTube page and also subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy podcast feed. All right, let's do this and talk about the main slate for today. Again, it's 4 games with locks set for 5:05 this evening, and there are some potential rain chances. There is a slight chance of rain in Baltimore for the Yankees and the Orioles. It should be fine, but check back on that one later on. Similar thing in Philadelphia, which makes sense given the proximity. I bet they play, but there is at least a chance that game is wet. So check back on the weather for the Yankees game and for the Phillies game. Pitching preview for this main slate. Framber Valdez is the highest salary pitcher on FanDuel, checking in at 10-1. We got Jordan Montgomery at $8,800 and Kyle Hendricks at $78,000. Nobody else above $7,000. Oh boy. And looking at the slate, you can tell things are pretty dicey at pitcher. I do think, though, that there is one guy who stands out as being very usable, someone you could consider on larger slates, too, and that's Framber Valdez. Not a big strikeout guy, which makes him tough to get to when it's a tougher slate, but, like, he's a good pitcher, and he's in a good matchup. So I think that Valdez is the one super process-based guy we can like on this main slate. I'll put Valdez at the top of my list. He's facing the Rangers, which is a great matchup for a lefty. Their ISO versus lefties is just 122, which means this is basically a team of David Fletchers, which means they also don't strike out that much. Their strikeout rate is 21%, and Valdez is not a huge strikeout guy either, but he can get some. He has a 23% strikeout rate in 7 starts with more curveballs. He has 7+ strikeouts in 3 of those 7 games as well, and that does include a 7 strikeout game against Texas back on August 28th. So close-ish in proximity, but still far enough where we're not super worried about the familiarity here between Texas and Valdez. So I think it's not enough to push me off, but it's at least worth noting. I think that Valdez winds up being the top guy of the night by default. Good pitcher from a batted ball perspective, great pitcher from a batted ball perspective, good matchup. I think that Valdez at 10-1 is the one guy you can feel good about. And as a result of that, I feel like it's a great night for single entry. Just plop in a single entry lineup, put Valdez a pitcher, try to deviate with their stacks potentially, but I do think he is kind of the one guy who fits the overall process for tonight. The second guy is by default. I can't the list is slim. Nobody else has good pitch counts or projects for enough strikeouts. There are bullpen games. There are rough matchups. There are guys who just don't pitch that well. So by default, we wind up on Jordan Montgomery being the number 2 option. He's facing the Orioles, and that's not a team I like to target with lefties because I think the Orioles are pretty good. They have a 108 WRC plus against lefties. They've got some power too. It's actually the highest ISO on the slate. The good thing is that Montgomery is well positioned to overcome that specifically. He can lower an opposing team's power because of his batted ball suppression skills. For Montgomery, he had a trip on the injury list earlier on this month, and his velocity's been down, both before he went on the IL and since he came back. That could be concerning, and his marks since then are not great. If we include the one start before, the velo is also down. He has a 21% strikeout rate, but he's still getting the good batted ball data. He's letting up just a 32% hard hit rate with a 31% fly ball rate. He did get 6 strikeouts twice in this time. One of those was against Boston. The pitch count should be worked up too because he went 97 2 starts ago, also against Baltimore, and he can get some whiffs. And that swinging strike rate, or the swinging strike rate for him against the Mets last start was 22.8%. So Montgomery is kind of what he always was before, where he'd have whiffs and have good batted ball data, but didn't always convert those whiffs into strikeouts. I don't expect that to change. I don't expect him to suddenly start converting whiffs into strikeouts because this has been a thing that's happened his entire career. But I think that even when we assume that the strikeout rate stays roughly around 21%, I do still think he's the number 2 option for today. Nobody else really stands out. So to me, it really is all about Valdez. Like if you're multi-entering, I would just load up on him and then differentiate with your stacks. For single entry, I'd go Valdez, not going Montgomery there. But I think that if you do have to go a second pitcher, like if you think that Valdez is bad chalk, Montgomery is your second option, just not one I feel great about personally. As far as stacks go for this main slate, it really revolves around the Yankees by a pretty wide margin. I do think you can stack the Yankees with Valdez too. Valdez is 10-1. He's not like he's 12-1. So that definitely helps. The Yankees are a team I prefer versus lefties because like some of their guys get boosts like Luke Voit and stuff like that, but they're still fine here. They're facing Chris Ellis. Ellis is up to 5 outings in the majors, which is a decent sample, and he's letting up a 46% hard hit rate with a 48% fly ball rate. That is a perfect recipe for home runs. His strikeout rate is 20%, which means, it's not as low as we'd always like, but it does mean lots of balls in play. His ERA is 2.08 in the majors. So that's been good. He has navigated his way around the hard contact, around the lack of strikeouts, and he's gotten good results. That's good on Chris Ellis for doing that. But in AAA, his ERA was 6.32. So I'm expecting a regression to hit here pretty soon, and it could well be tonight versus this Yankees team, and the Yankees are the top stack here as a result. As far as the Yankees go, we've talked a lot about Joey Gallo recently. Obviously, he's struggling quite a bit, and it makes it tough to go there too often. But if we're looking at Gallo the past month, his strikeout rate versus righties is about 10 percentage points lower than it is against lefties. I'm fine with him against lefties because I love the power. And I'm okay using guys who are pretty likely to take a 0 because I know that every pitcher or every batter can do that. But I think that it does help that Gallo has a lower strikeout rate here versus righties, especially as Ellis can get some strikeouts. He's still hitting the ball really hard. We just need to make contact. And I think that's a better bet versus a righty than a lefty. So Gallo, to me, $3,100, very fair number, and a guy I'm willing to go towards for tonight. It's a small slate. We want guys who have slate busting upside. Gallo, despite his issues, still hitting home runs. So he does have that for sure. So Joey Gallo, to me, a good play once again for tonight. The second stack is one I wouldn't usually go towards because I'm always pretty scared of stacking against Kyle Hendricks because he's a good pitcher. He's very smart and he can shut teams down. He just did that to San Francisco last week. But both the results and the peripherals indicate the Phillies are in play for tonight. Hendricks has not been using his curveball his past 11 starts. It's been way down. His usage has been. His skill interactive ERA in that time is 5.03. He has a 15% strikeout rate. He is still suppressing our contact, and we can often see guys outperform their peripherals when they do that because hard contact does matter a lot. Hendricks hasn't done that, though. His ERA is 5.84. He let up 6 earned runs to the Pirates 2 starts ago. The Pirates? He let up 8 to the White Sox. 9 to the Brewers. He's also really struggling with lefties this year. The ground ball rate against them is just 36%. And when we're looking at stacking the Phillies, those are the guys we'd want to use. So I do think we should stack the Phillies here versus Hendricks and see what happens. And the same guys in this stack are the same guys we used last night or a couple nights ago. We got Harper, Didi, Brad Miller, Odubel Herrera. It's a great 4-player stack to build around here because Herrera, Miller, and Gregorius are all low salary, which means you can get nuts with the Yankees stack. You can get to Rizzo, Stanton, Judge, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think that going the combo of Phillies Yankees, taking advantage of the lower salaried guys in the Phillies to get to Harper, to get to the Yankees, that's the way I want to play things straight up for tonight. So to me, it really is 3 things, Valdez, Yankees, Phillies. If you want to go elsewhere, I do think the Rays are fine against Tyler Alexander. He's gotten better recently. That's why I'm not as high on that situation. Could go at the Astros facing Glenn Otto as well. But to me, I do think that the Yankees and the Phillies are the top stacks for tonight, all things considered. That wraps up the main slate. So if you're listening to this podcast after, I believe it's after 2:02, feel free to move on to your life. Go, set those Thursday Night Football lineups, whatever it may be, because you will already have the early-only slate locked. Let's talk about the early-only slate right now. Just 3 games with lock set for 210 for today. The pitchers on the early-only slate are Kevin Gausman at $10,600. Then Alex Cobb, Reynaldo Lopez, and Paul Blackburn are the others at $7,000 or higher. So it's Gausman, massive, massive, massive gap, and then the rest. And I have my issues with Gausman. He's also not in a great matchup for tonight, but I think that he's the top guy on this early slate just because he's the one guy whose skill you can believe in most. And that's the one thing here that Gausman does have is skill. He trimmed his pitch mix down to basically be just a fastball and a splitter 13 starts ago. He's had some bumps in that time, but overall, the numbers are pretty good. He has a 3.59 skill interactive ERA. His strikeout rate is 29%. And those are really good marks. And he does need those tonight because he's facing the Padres. The Padres don't strike out very much. They have just a 21% strikeout rate versus righties. That's a downside. The rest of it's fine. As you know, the Padres have not been playing the best baseball recently. They have a 100 WRC plus against righties with a 162 ISO, which means they are less likely to kill you. It's more so about the low strikeout number that does make me not want to use pitchers who are facing them. And it does help that, again, from a safety perspective, this game is in San Francisco because it is a good park for pitching. So I like Gausman a lot relative to the rest of the slate. I would not say he is unfadable, but he is good enough to feel solid about him. So Gausman, to me, the number 1 option. The number 2 on this slate, I feel better about than the number 2 on the main slate. So I talked about Montgomery kind of using that out of obligation. I can actually see being okay with Reynaldo Lopez. He is kind of here by default as well because we've got a bullpen game on this slate. We've got Cobb coming off the IL. Other guys are not super high strikeout pitchers. So we wind up on Lopez, but I don't think that's terrible. His pitch count is fully up now. Lopez went 90 pitches last time out, so I would think he can go decently deep for tonight, and he's facing the Angels. His strikeout rate the Angels' strikeout rate against right is up to 25%. They have a 101 WRC plus, so it's not a tough matchup. They're striking out a lot recently, especially. And I think that is a good thing here for Lopez. And Lopez, he's been fine in this longer role. He has 7 outings since his pitch count increased. He had a 4.36 skill interactive ERA in that time with a 22% strikeout rate. He's letting up just a 37% hard hit rate, and we can work with that for sure. So Lopez seems to be better than he was in his previous stints in rotation. He's also just $7,400. So, if we were assigning probabilities, the different pitchers would be the highest scores for tonight. I would say Gausman's probably around 55% or so, just because there's so little competition. Lopez is probably about 35%. So I'd say those two guys account for a grand majority of the odds to be the highest scoring pitcher of the night. I am more than okay with Lopez, and I feel better about him again than I do about Montgomery on the main slate. So to me, it's Gausman 1, Lopez 2, and I probably will have exposure to both on this early-only slate. I think that there's enough in Lopez to feel okay about that. There are enough concerns around Gausman and his matchup where I can feel okay having a little bit less of him. So I do think the slate is a little bit better at pitcher than the main slate. As far as the stacking goes, on the early only slate, the A's are facing Daniel Lynch, and I've talked about Lynch quite a bit recently. I love that he is tinkering. I love that he is changing some things up. I love that he's trying to improve. I'm just not sure it's enough for me to jump off the A's. Specifically, Lynch is throwing more sinkers and sliders over his past 7 starts. He is throwing fewer changeups, and the sinkers, in theory, should improve his batted ball data. The problem is that sliders often negate that. Sliders I love because they're great for strikeouts, but they also do tend to let up a bit more hard contact than something like a sinker would do. And we're seeing some of that in the data for Lynch. He is letting up a 42% hard hit rate with a 43% fly ball rate across this 7-start sample. That's good for home runs. So again, I love that he's tinkering. I love that he's trying to find the right combo. He just hasn't found that right combo yet. He's let up 2 home runs in back-to-back games. His overall ERA in this time is 4.37, so it's not terrible, but I think that we should stack the A's here and take advantage of the batted ball numbers, which are very good for the long ball here. Within the A stacks, I am very okay with whoever catches. Don't really care. It can be Yan Gomes. It can be Sean Murphy. Don't care. Gomes is a 271 ISO against lefties. He has great batted ball data. Love that. Sean Murphy, 164 ISO, so lower than Gomes, but puts the ball in the air a ton. So I'm good with either guy, honestly. And I will use whoever winds up being behind the dish for today as a catcher / first baseman on FanDuel. I think that both Gomes and Murphy very much viable, and I will feel okay with either for today. For the second stack, I'm actually staying in that same game and going at the Royals. I do think the Giants are fine facing a bullpen game for the Padres, and I will use them too. But I kind of like the Royals. They're facing Paul Blackburn, who is a low strikeout guy who lets up a lot of balls in play. He is also letting up a 49% hard hit rate. All those things are awesome from a DFS perspective. The one downside is that he does get some ground balls. Blackburn does. In the 5 starts in the big leagues, his fly ball rate allowed is 28%. It was 22% in AAA. So that's annoying. Yeah, it's a lot lower than you want it to be. But I think that the Royals will put the ball in play, and we can see what happens after that. Plus, the Royals have some stolen base guys on this team, so they can generate good games even without home runs. Blackburn let up 4 runs last time out against the Rangers. That is not a good team either. So lesser teams can't get to him, and that does make me feel better about using the Royals here. So the A's and the Royals, that game, my favorite option for stacking for the early on the slate. The big salary saver here on the Royals, if you're trying to get to Gausman, is Ryan O'Hearn. He is $2,100. He's not great by any means, but he puts the ball in the air a bunch. He can hit home runs, and that can make it easier to get to the higher salary guys here, like Salvador Perez if he plays, Adalberto Mondesi, et cetera, et cetera. So O'Hearn and the A's, the value plays in the A's, should make this slate a bit easier to navigate. So I think you get to Gausman pretty easily, but I'm also okay going down to Lopez, loading up on Mondesi, getting Perez, et cetera, and just basking in the studs on these 2 respective teams. That is all that we have here for today on the solo shot. Once again, if you didn't listen to the main slate one, go back and check that out. Get set for that with lock at 5:05 for tonight. It's going to be a weird slate, so have some fun with it. Enjoy, see what happens, but it'll feel chaotic filling out lineups for sure. As a quick reminder, we are back here once again at 10 a.m. on the FanDuel YouTube page, breaking down the Week 2 NFL DFS main slate with myself and Brandon Gadula. We will have that up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed after that. Find that by searching for numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, etc. We are on all of those platforms. If you've got more questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to everyone for tuning in for today. Good luck to you on both the early only and the main slates. We'll talk to you once again on Friday to wrap things up. This has been the solo shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.